Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. I'm Patrick Devaney, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our conversation today, recorded here at ISTE, live in Philadelphia. We are all excited about the wonderful things that we're seeing at ISTE, the full crowd, conference is back to full force, and a lot of energy around the conversation is really focused on AI. So we thought it was a wonderful time together, a good panel, a great panel, and talk about some of the ethical implications of utilizing AI, just to put a little twist on it and really focus on some things that are really, really important. So with that, let's get on with it. And I think I'd like to have Ken, you introduce yourself first.
Yeah, certainly. So my name is Ken Shelton. I'm an educator based in Los Angeles. I taught for 20 years. I've worked in education for almost 30 years now. I am currently a speaker, designer, consultant, advisor, and overall educator, whatever it may be. And I'm looking forward to the conversation about artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Fantastic. Dr. Williams.
Hey, well, happy to be here, and ISTE is certainly exciting. I'm Avis Williams, the proud superintendent for NOLA Public Schools in New Orleans. Coming up on my first year there, and was superintendent in Selma, Alabama for 5 years before that. Former English teacher, served as elementary, middle, and high school principal, but really excited to lean in on this important topic.
Fantastic. Welcome. And Todd.
Yeah, great to be here. My name is Todd Baker. I'm with Turnitin. I manage the partnerships and alliances there. I was an educator for 10 years and then have been in the edtech space for 23 years. And we focus on integrity in writing, and happy to be here.
Fantastic. This is going to be fun. We're all excited about this. I think one of the best places to start, AI is everywhere. And there are so many aspects to it and facets to it. I think I'd like to throw the conversation down the path of, are you all in? Are you all out? Or is there a line? And how would we draw that line? How would we start to draw that line? And does anybody want to start with that?
I can start with that.
Okay. Thanks.
So a couple of things. One, you're all in whether you want to be or not. Artificial intelligence has actually been around since the mid-50s.
Mm-hmm.
What we now are seeing is the latest proliferation of artificial general intelligence. If you've used anything from Siri or one of the voice-activated assistants on your phone, that is artificial intelligence. I've been around EdTech long enough that when I was writing in Microsoft Word and I would make a punctuation mistake and a little clippy would pop up, that was artificial intelligence. I am definitely all in, but I am also all in with a degree of scrutiny and the right perspective of critical thinking.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, I think that was a great answer, first of all, because you have to be all in. It's here, it's not going anywhere, and it's been here for decades, right? So for me, I'm definitely all in. And for me as an educator, I want to make sure that we're prepping our students to be successful in the world that we're providing for them, the world that we're preparing them for. And I also want to make sure that for the adults that we are addressing fear factors, because the fear can be crippling. And it can cause us to not to do the best job that we can for our scholars. I talk a lot about equity being one of my core values. So is excellence. And our scholars deserve the very best. And we can't give them that and prepare them for the world that's out there if we're sitting around thinking this might go away or paralyzed by fear of what it is or what we think it is. So all in.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Same thing. I concur with the other two colleagues here. We are all in whether we want to or not. From our perspective, as on the vendor side, we've been using AI for writing assistance since 2015 in some of our solutions. And so the detection piece that we brought into market recently is only the most recent aspect of it. We use it every day. It is engaged with how we engage in social and in education.
Yeah.
Is it fair to restrict the conversation a little bit to generative AI? Because we've talked about AI here in a whole lot of different facets. And I think a lot of the buzz right now, a lot of the activity, a lot of the focus is on the newer availability of generative AI.
Yeah,
so is that a fair distinction to make?
Sure. That's a good
Fantastic.
one. Yeah.
Sounds like we're all fans of AI, but we have some reservations. Let's talk a little bit more about what those reservations are. Because, for example, are there places where generative AI is great and there are places where it is absolutely horrible?
Yeah.
And there probably are.
Yeah.
So examples or thoughts on that?
I mean, I can give you three in each. So first of all, the whole idea around generative AI is that the platforms are built on a large language model. And so you're not operating within, for the audience, you're not operating within a limited data set. So I'll give a contextual example. When you use Siri or Alexa, that is a limited data set, meaning that you can only give certain inputs because it's only going to give you certain outputs. Generative AI is a large language learning model, if you will, that there's such a massive volume of data that is used that it learns from our patterns, the words that we use and how we structure them. And it operates from a continuous data set that it uses those patterns to learn and predict what future patterns are going to be. So with that being said, it will be very good and is very good at supporting us at things like generating ideas or contextualizing context around, for example, our writing. What it is incapable of doing is anything around emotional intelligence. It is also incapable of providing cultural context. And then the last thing that it is incapable of doing is representing the nuance of each of our individual voices.
I'm going to break that down for educators out there. So what that means in terms of how we teach our children is that we have to prepare them for that. They need to know that this is a tool, and it's an excellent tool and resource, but it's not going to be able to replace the work that you need to do or the critical thinking that you need to do. And it's absolutely not going to replace the human contact and the relationships that we build, especially as it relates to understanding cultural differences and, just understanding the nuances that may exist within any classroom climate and culture. And so for me, when I think about any reservations, it's how do we do that? How do we get to a space where our teachers are equipped enough, confident enough to be able to do that? And I would argue that it makes instructional coaching look a whole lot different than it does now.
100%.
Because we've got to have a different level of preparation for the people who are giving our teachers feedback, who are supporting them in terms of evaluation, who are supporting them in terms of improvement and that type of thing, if that's an issue.
Sure.
And we've got a lot to figure out as it relates to that. And I do think that we're going to have to lean in from an intergenerational standpoint in order to do it well.
Correct.
Because what I know for sure is as we are preparing new teachers, they're from a different generation. I'm two generations removed from them, Gen X, yay. And with that being the case, we've got to make sure that we're meeting our teachers where they are and get away from this expectation that they're coming into our world and have to come up to speed or whatever the case is to where we are. So it's twofold. It's making sure that our students understand what it is and what it's not. And then it's making sure that our teachers not only have the support, but consistently have the support so that we're looking at instructional coaching and preparation differently.
Fantastic. That support is something that I think Todd's right on, right? You've got a tool for that you do.
Well, and it falls in line with, and it's more than just the tool, right? It's the approach and where writing fits in with the assessment piece of an evaluation. You mentioned evaluation, Dr. Williams, and the recognition of what large language models do. They're not large cognitive models, right? All they do is they predict next words and filling in a sentence to a prompt. So we don't want to develop prompt writers, right? We want to develop critical thinking and people who can write in their own voice and communicate in their own voice. Communication is a key aspect of what we need to develop in our learners. And so we play a role in that in terms of trying to be able to detect that and expose that from a writing perspective. But there's a whole aspect of it in terms of how you work with educators to drive, writing prompts that are in the personal voice of the student that generate critical thinking and decision making and that can be exposed there that the generative AI can't really do very well. It'll give you a lot of bad information.
And do we have adequate policies around the use of AI yet? I mean, have we it's not an easy task.
No.
We also had a great conversation on how ChatGPT can help with policy writing. And is that a thing, as to use it as your foundation? And so we started talking about our current policies, what they look like, and what changes may have to be made. Yeah. And we landed it. We're not sure yet.
Right.
I mean, there's still implications that we just don't know yet.
Well, if I may add, so I do support a lot of districts on either executive briefings or doing policy analysis. I'll share with the audience with y'all a number of things. So number one, if you have a comprehensive digital citizenship policy, AI needs to be included in that period, which is why I'm staunchly against blocking of it. You can't tell me that you have a digital citizenship policy, but then go and block artificial intelligence. It does make sense. So that's number one. Number two is I encourage educators to reframe their perspective on things like ChatGPT in the following capacity. So number one, what if you were to refer to it as an assistive technology? Does your perspective change on that? What if you were to refer to it as an additional resource that you can collaborate with, not unlike you can collaborate with a physical human being who's in the classroom? So when you do all those things, the other layer to it is there is nothing wrong with using it as a catalyst for the generation of ideas. Or I've even shown examples of where I've drafted certain policies. I've put it in ChatGPT, and you do have to have, this is where I go into the whole idea around literacy. Literacy, I describe as always in 5 dimensions: the reading, writing, speaking, listening, observing. And so part of that would be something like this, like to your point. We don't want to focus on a prompt engineer, but you want to focus on the nuance of the language and the syntax that you use in that prompt. Otherwise, with AI, you can go a myriad of directions. So I shared an example with executive cabinet for a district where we took an existing policy and I put it in. And I basically gave it a prompt of, make this policy better, make sure that it includes equity at its core, include the use of technology, and include a mechanism for a list of resources to augment the policy. And it generated it. And I said, okay, so now what do we think about this? And everybody looked at it like, well, I like this, but not this, but not this. And I go, now apply your district context and culture to that. They did that. And then we had a policy. So you see, isn't going to, nor should it replace, to the point Dr. Williams even shared, it shouldn't replace the human element. And if you look at it as another resource and another mechanism that is assistive, then you're not going to solely rely on it ever in the first place. And that even goes with students, whether it be, if you go with the equity piece, which I've brought up, is if the teacher is not in a position due to whatever purpose or whatever reason, constraints there are, to provide feedback, if I were in the classroom right now, I would say, here's a proficiency rubric we're going to use for our current writing sample. What you're going to do is you're going to generate a 500-word essay. You're going to plug in that, and then you're going to put your essay in and tell ChatGPT, give me feedback on this essay based on this rubric. And then it'll give you feedback. And then you go back and then you make corrections. And then now you run it through it again. And then when it meets that standard, that's what you turn in. Think about that feedback loop is now much more streamlined, but also recognizing that there are going to be limitations with ChatGPT and other things. Because if you do writing, again, I did a thing real quick. I did a thing where I showed a group of educators in the Atlanta area. And I said, I'm going to show you all proof that it lacks any degree of cultural context. So I wrote an entire paragraph of a story that I would tell a close friend of mine, strictly in African-American vernacular English. It couldn't figure out what I wrote. And I go, that's why you'll never replace the human element to it.
Well, and it's using, the algorithms use predictive models to choose the next best word, right? From a corpus of data that is huge. So it's good at synthesizing large general information. But like you said, the nuances, the culture, the specifics, the voice, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
So there's a continuity aspect to this as well. So Turnitin works in higher ed and also works in the corporate world in terms of authenticity of research, of other documents. How do we build that back? Because we have to kind of build it backwards a little bit to create the right citizens in the long term. How do we start to do that? Are there partnerships? Are there collaborations that can be done to help facilitate it? Because as you said, we don't really have policies yet. We don't know that we know enough about the policies, but in order to build them, isn't some of that collaboration something that may really help?
I agree.
I think the conversation we were having, positive digital culture, for me, this fits perfectly with that because we don't have to move far away from just the foundational things that we believe in. So when I think about culture, the fact that we have generative technology does not change my belief of what a positive school culture looks like.
Exactly.
Where children feel safe, they have brave spaces where they can bring their whole selves into the classroom. And to your point, it's technology can't help them do that because technology may not recognize their whole self, depending on new cultural vernaculars and that type of thing. So I think this is one place because I really don't like the term back to basics. But this is one of those spaces.
Sounds regressive.
Where we just think about foundational stuff, right? What do we want our children to feel? What do we want their experience to be like at school? And how do we continue to make sure we prioritize that even with changing technologies?
Technology doesn't change good, sound teaching and learning practices.
And to the theme that we're doing in terms of ethics, right?
Yeah.
Ethics should not also change from the basis to forward. There's always going to be an ethic on what originality means and what original work means, right?
Exactly.
Cheating is cheating,
And
right?
cheating. It's just that what tools come into play in terms of either assisting or detecting or what changes over time. Right? We had contract cheating, which was I could pay someone to go do something versus pulling something off the web, which 1992 or whatever was not. So we run into these different situations where that ethic, that underlying basis should still be there, and that's something should be understood. And then we look at that and point out, well, where would there be conflict with that ethic? An assessment is something where it's very definitive in terms of we should be looking at what's the value of making sure that ethic is strong in that versus something where someone's using it for productivity, where we're trying to advance and increase the speed of being able to collect all this knowledge that's out there to get us to a point where we can actually make decisions and do our work.
Can I provide a slightly adjacent perspective on that?
Please.
I think for me, the whole thing, because you all mentioned the C word, which I love to interrogate that word, not that I'm in disagreement with you. Is I always ask educators, especially school or district leadership, how do you discern the difference between academic integrity and academic reality? And the reason why I say that is you all mentioned cheating. I always ask people, define cheating for me, because the whole idea around cheating generally is associated with one of two things. Either I took some sort of a shortcut that circumvented the purpose of the process that I needed to go through, or I've used something that I have now misrepresented as my own, which is how legally how plagiarism is defined. It's taking another human's work, keyword, and representing it as your own. But the reason why I say those two things is because when it comes to academic reality, is the whole idea around if I generate an essay in ChatGPT and I turn it in, I'd be accused of cheating. But the academic reality when it comes to equity is I myself had students that their parents would pay a tutor to come in the home and their tutor would write their essay for them and they would turn that in. But you would never even consider that if you didn't know it. You need to know that occurred in order to say, well, that's cheating. And my whole thing is to reframe a number of things. One, I'm definitely an advocate against the worship of the written word. I love writing, but I also know that writing tends to be overemphasized at the expense of other creative representations of voice. I used to teach film and video production as well. And so, you run Turn It In. I always share with educators, like, it's a cat and mouse game. Is Turn It In going to be able to keep up with the large language model? I don't know, but you shouldn't have to. The whole idea is to say, look, one, if I'm doing a research paper, what is one of the things that I could do? Okay, cite contemporary examples in your research, because it doesn't keep up with, literally, give me an example of something you've seen in a context and a cultural relevant capacity last week. You're not going to get that with ChatGPT. If I'm asking students to construct, following, let's say, the hero's journey, if I limit them to a 5-paragraph essay, I can already do that in ChatGPT in less than 30 seconds. But if I say, I want you to do it in a format of a screenplay and I want you to film and produce it, Well, now I can use ChatGPT to do that, but I still have to understand the construct of story and the hero and the protagonist arc. And now I have to represent it visually, because you see, I'm using multimedia as a mechanism to represent my knowledge and understanding. And that's how you circumvent only going to a platform where you're looking for, I would say, a shortcut. But even in that capacity, I always ask educators the first grade, because this happened to me when I taught. I would literally, with students, they would take a shortcut and say, what was missing that you felt you needed to take a shortcut? And what should we do differently so that you're fully invested in the learning opportunity that I'm designing for you? Because then the whole idea is, it doesn't matter what exists. I mean, I remember the days, I'll share with you all, I remember when my math teachers told me I couldn't use a calculator. And now I have one with me at all times. I remember the days when teachers were like, don't let the kids use Google because they're just going to Google the answer. I remember the days when they said you can't use Wikipedia, even though I grew up using an Encyclopedia Britannica. Like, rather than operate from a fear and a denial and a resistance, it's like, how do I leverage this to do many of the things that I already do at a more efficient and accelerated capacity?
Well, and this is something, these are questions that come back to us a lot of times in terms of, yeah, you can detect where something may have been written in AI. What do I do next? Or how do I use that? Is it a data point, or is it something where it's a piece of evidence? And a lot of that goes, I jump back to the policy piece, because that kind of drives where the protection is for the educator. But it creates a conversation. It becomes a point to have discussion to really understand the learning of the individual, is because writing it down, they may have difficulty writing.
Correct.
Where does it become a conversation where you have an oral discussion about what they wrote, and did they really come up with that thought? And the evaluation is not necessarily just singular and linear in this.
I actually did it. I did it with a group of educators. I said, we're going to do a quick social experiment. Watch what I write. I'm going to write a paragraph and watch what happens. And I literally wrote a paragraph, no nuance of voice, I would describe as heavy academic vanilla language. And it was about the weather and stuff. And I said, watch this. I copied and pasted it. And then the AI detector said it was a 98% chance that it was AI generated. And I said, and you all just watch exactly. And I said, you all just watch me write that. So now, to your point, now what does that tell us about the AI checkers? What does that tell us about how we write? And I go, and more importantly, what does that tell you about what I actually wrote? What was missing? Voice.
And what you knew.
And what I knew.
And what your thought process was.
Correct. Yes.
One thing that we have to also make sure is that we're using student voice, giving students a voice, a seat at the table as decisions about this being made.
I agree.
Opinions. They have their own thoughts of what their experience already is and what it could be.
Exactly.
In relation to how we.
Yeah.
So how do we protect that? I mean, it's an incredibly valid point when we're here all to talk about education and how to make sure that students have an equal, fair, great opportunity to learn. How do we protect that for them? What else can we do?
I don't know if protect is the right word.
Empower.
Yeah, it's empowering.
Absolutely.
To understand how to use it, and empowering them to still understand that they do have a voice and that their voice matters.
Correct. I agree.
As you were talking, I'm thinking of all kinds of activities that you could do to really lift up student voice. To the point where you write a paragraph in your voice and compare it, do a compare and contrast.
Comparative analysis, correct.
Just find ways for them to understand that their voice is what's most important in terms of how they're communicating, but empowering them to explore. We want children to be curious, right?
Yep.
But shame on us if we expect curiosity and then we're operating out of fear. Those don't match. And this is not about controlling our children. It's not about protecting them. I absolutely agree. It's about empowering them to embrace this, because it's part of the now and it's part of the future. Who knows what this will generate into as we move over the next decade.
What we have right now is the absolute worst version of artificial intelligence. Generative AI is going to exist. That's right. That's right.
Better. Well, I think we probably are just about out of time. I can't thank you enough for this conversation. I think it's very, very rich, very full, and I hope I can have you all back again at some point in the future.
Definitely.
I think that there's a couple of takeaways that I've gotten from this. The first one, empowering is really the right answer, because you're empowering them not just as youth, but you're empowering them as adults and starting that process now. So we're really building the right kind of citizenship and use of technology. Mm-hmm. I think we don't know what we don't know, but we have to stay on it. And we have to keep trying, and we have to keep, even if it's marginal improvement, we keep doing that. And it's going to improve the outcomes the same way the technology continues to improve. And I think another thing that came out of this, for me anyway, is collaboration and work together with the focus on those children is really ultimately what's going to drive this. Did I miss anything out of that?
No, I'll just throw in one additional thing. And the proliferation of AI, to me, accelerates the urgency to ensure that we have better representation within the tech field, especially of those that are of a historically excluded and marginalized background. And that's where my concern, it's not a fear, my concern is how AI can automate many of the inequities and the biases that already exist within our social construct.
But it also is an opportunity to change that, to make it.
You got to have the right people who are doing the coding and coding the algorithms and making the decisions as to where the venture capital funding and financial resource allocation goes. And that's all the more reason why it's important and critical to really stress having much more accessibility for computer science and STEM-related educational opportunities.
Couldn't agree more. I think it highlights it, and gives you a chance to focus on it. So thank you so much. We highlighted something today, and we'll talk about it more again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.